going on this morning? I feel like I want to do this, and I feel like I have a right to do this because I'm from Northern California, where the hippies come from. We're going to all take, if you want, one deep breath together. And I want to express my gratitude to everyone who worked to protect us this morning, and to Rena Lee and Marla for coordinating the communication of everything that happened. So thank you for that. And now back to our regularly scheduled draft. I learned earlier this week from Rabbi Ronit Sadok that there is a special name for the week on the Jewish calendar in which Tisha B'Av falls. It's Shavua Shechal Bo, which translates to the week when it happened. So of course this name for us this year has a special, a different, and a tragic meaning. This week is the week in which Tisha B'Av, our Jewish day for grief and lament, did happen. It concluded this past Thursday at sundown. And it's also the week in which Israel's current government began to execute its plan to overhaul the country's judicial system. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition passed the first part of their program, stripping Israel's Supreme Court of its power to overturn certain government decisions and appointments. Even those of us who might agree with the details of this overhaul must recognize that a remarkable number of Israeli citizens, our Jewish sisters and brothers, are in opposition. Our homeland is in turmoil because we are in turmoil. This is the week when it happened. Early this week, Israeli lawmakers approved a key change to the judiciary, a change opposed by many. Lawmakers were unable to reach a compromise. The measure passed uncontested after opposition lawmakers walked out in protest. This new law cancels the reasonableness clause, which allowed Israel's Supreme Court to block government appointments and decisions by elected officials that it deemed unreasonable and not in the public interest. Now, the High Court has lost that ability, a crucial check on political power in Israel. For instance, the court recently used this power to block a politician who had been convicted of financial crimes from becoming Israel's finance minister. They deemed this political appointment unreasonable. Shocking, I know. Now the government will be able to hire and fire officials without the intervention of the court. Now further, since Israel has no written constitution, and since Israel has a unicameral legislature, unlike our two houses of Congress, this new law could produce what the American Jewish Committee calls a majoritarian government, in which the narrowest possible majority could upend the rights of the minority, making fundamental changes, perhaps in the heat of the moment. This week I attended 7 different briefings about our current situation in Israel from 7 different organizations spanning a wide range of perspectives. Across such a variety of opinions and political orientations, there were common themes, common feelings, and overall more consonance, more agreement than I would have expected. Eric Fingerhut, president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America, introduced one of these briefings by noting the large number of people who had joined, almost 2,500, and explaining that this massive turnout indicated the concern, anxiety, and fear that we are all feeling in this moment. In this briefing, as well as another one of the briefings I attended this week, the term civil war was used, with both speakers who used it acknowledging that civil war is not happening now, but the fact that people are speaking these words out loud is a tremendous concern. And in 3 of the briefings, including the most far left and the most far right, they spoke about the tremendous division in Israeli society, warning that our inability to listen to one another will tear us apart. My colleagues Rabbi Idit Lev and Rabbi Mikey Goldstein, both rabbis of the Masorti movement in Israel, both spoke in the Rabbinical Assembly briefing about how they feel like the protests have fundamentally shifted their daily life. Rabbi Lev says, "It feels like you've lost control of your life. You can't go to every single one of the protests, but what are you going to do, stay home?" She also spoke about the physical strain of standing and walking in these protests for hours on end. Rabbi Goldstein says, "It feels like things are imploding. How can I work? I have to be out there with the people. We have to look after the minority, the widow and the orphan. If we don't, it will lead us to destruction. If I don't protest," he said, "I feel like I should just lie down and let people trample over me." He shared that he made the difficult decision to speak at a protest on Shabbat in his hometown of Rehovot. For him, the Chilul Shabbat, the violation of certain aspects of Shabbat observance, was worth doing because it was essential for his voice to be heard. Yet, some of my colleagues did not share these sentiments about the protests and the protesters. Rabbi Amirit Rosen, also a rabbi in Jerusalem, shared that in her community, there's not agreement about the judicial reform. Many oppose it, but some do not. She shared that she tries to veer away from discussing politics, and that she saw Tisha B'Av, especially this year, as an opportunity to cry together no matter what our views are. She also shared that the protests affect the broader community in a way that doesn't come across in photo or video. The water and the water cannons that is used to clear protesters off the roadways has a terrible stench. People call them skunk cannons. While Rabbi Amirit Rosen was speaking in this Zoom briefing, there was a heated back and forth developing among my colleagues who were attending the briefing, and this was taking place in the Zoom chat, which for some incomprehensible reason the facilitators did not disable. This debate was about whether the protesters are defying democracy by protesting and blocking traffic, which is against the law, or whether the protesters are an expression of democracy and warriors for democracy. I'm not entirely sure whether that debate was settled, but I couldn't help notice that the two sides didn't seem to be listening to one another. Whether we have a failure to listen in the Zoom chat of a webinar, in a family disagreement, or in our homeland, the state of Israel, our inability to listen to one another threatens to tear us apart. We know that Tisha B'Av commemorates the destruction of the first and second Holy Temple in ancient Jerusalem. Centuries after that happened, the rabbis of the Talmud grappled with their history and attempted to understand why. In Tractate Yoma, they say that the first temple was destroyed due to 3 sins that were occurring in the temple: idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and murder. But they then say, in the time of the second temple, people were studying Torah, observing mitzvot, and doing acts of loving kindness. So what was the problem the second time? Sinat chinam, senseless hatred. In Tractate Gittin, the rabbis tell a story to illustrate what this phrase senseless hatred means exactly, and to explain the sequence of events leading up to the destruction of the second temple. It all started with a man who had a friend named Kamsa and an enemy named Bar Kamsa. This man tried to invite his friend Kamsa to a social gathering, but the details got mixed up, and Bar Kamsa was the one who arrived. The man who was hosting the gathering was taken aback. Bar Kamsa, knowing something was amiss, tried to save face. He offered to pay for more of his share of the food and the drink at the party. But the host, the man, wasn't having it. He personally and forcibly removed Bar Kamsa from the premises. Now, meanwhile, attending this social gathering were several important rabbis. They saw the whole thing go down, and they did nothing. Bar Kamsa decides to get revenge on these rabbis. He convinces the emperor to send the rabbis a gift, but then sabotages the gift so it's not kosher. Most of the rabbis wanted to accept the gift anyway, in order not to offend. But one rabbi, Zechariah ben Avkulas, insists on following technicalities. Technically, they can't accept the gift, and technically, they can't hold Bar Kamsa responsible. The rest is history. The emperor takes offense, and the temple is destroyed. Every one of the briefings I attended acknowledged this story of Tisha B'Av and implored us to learn from our history. Rabbi Mikey Goldstein, who I mentioned before, even said that the state of Israel itself is our third holy temple, and that at least for today, our division, our unwillingness to listen, our unwillingness to compromise has not destroyed us yet. Now, what can we do? First, we must listen. We must listen to people we know and people who we have not yet met. We must listen to people who share our political views, and we must listen to people who don't share our political views. When we do this, we are building our own well-informed understanding of the events at hand. We definitely do not have to agree with everything we hear, but we do have to work to understand what we hear. And I mean all of what we hear, not just the parts that we like. And next, once we build our well-informed understanding, we must make our voice heard. Zvika Klein, journalist for the Jerusalem Post and Makor Rishon, spoke in the Jewish Federation's briefing and encouraged all of us to make our voices heard. You have a right to Israel as much as anyone, he said passionately, knowing he was speaking to Jews who are not registered to vote in Israel. Professor Yedidia Stern of the Law School of Bar Ilan University outlined his remedy, a constitution for the state of Israel, and said to those listening in the webinar, you decide your share in making this happen. In saying this, Professor Stern told us that we too have political power, and that it is our choice how and whether we use it. This week already, I, along with Rena Lee, have been making plans to speak personally with Dr. Yitzhar Hess, Vice Chairman of the World Zionist Organization, who represents the Merkaz Party of the Conservative and Masorti movement. I and the Adat Shalom community will continue to be at the forefront of learning, listening, and making our voices heard in this global Jewish conversation. Our parsha this week is called Vaetchanan, meaning, and I pleaded. This week, may we plead with God for the willingness and the strength to listen, to learn, and to take action. May we, as a global Jewish community, a global Jewish family, choose to let go of our senseless hatred and instead choose the path of love, of negotiation, of compromise, of peace. Am Yisrael Chai, Shabbat Shalom.